In early 1942, Allied pilots were convinced of something terrifying. One fighter simply could not be beaten. It climbed faster, turned tighter, and stayed airborne longer than anything they had ever faced. Against it, confidence collapsed, and entire squadrons vanished from the sky. That belief shaped everything that followed. It created doctrines, arrogance, and a fatal assumption about how air combat worked, and how it always would. Then the Americans revealed a new aircraft. Heavy, armored, almost absurd by the standards of aerial duels. To its enemies, it looked like a joke. So how did a machine mocked for its weight become the most lethal fighter of the Pacific War? And how did one encounter expose that Japan and America were fighting two completely different wars? To understand that, we have to start with the fighter that made everyone believe they were unbeatable. To understand why the Hellcat was dismissed as a joke, you first need to understand what the Zero represented. In late 1941 and early 1942, the Mitsubishi A6M0 was not simply an aircraft. It was a shock to every air force that encountered it. When it appeared over Pearl Harbor, the Philippines, and Southeast Asia, it behaved unlike anything the Allies had ever faced. It climbed faster than expected, it turned tighter than anything else in the sky, and it stayed airborne far longer than logic suggested it should. Pilots who survived encounters with the Zero struggled to describe it. Some believed it defied known limits of aeronautics. Others were convinced the Japanese had discovered secret technology. The numbers reinforced the myth. At Pearl Harbor, Japanese losses were minimal, while hundreds of American aircraft were destroyed or disabled. In the Philippines, the imbalance was even worse. Allied squadrons were wiped out again and again by an enemy that seemed untouchable. The Zero did more than win battles. It crushed confidence, to be why early 1942, a terrifying conclusion spread through Allied air forces. The Zero could not be beaten in a fair fight. When American engineers finally examined a captured Zero later that year, disbelief turned into grim clarity. The aircraft had the range of a light bomber, the maneuverability of a pre-war biplane, and enough firepower to shred anything in front of it. This was not accidental. The Zero was the result of a ruthless design philosophy led by its chief designer, Jiro Horikoshi. He had been tasked with an almost impossible requirement: build a carrier-based fighter faster, more agile, and with longer range than any land-based aircraft in the world. There was only one way to achieve that. Everything else had to be sacrificed. There was no armor to protect the pilot. No self-sealing fuel tanks. Often, even the radio was removed to save weight. One well-placed bullet could ignite the aircraft instantly. A short burst of gunfire could turn it into a fireball. But as long as it was not hit, the Zero was extraordinary. Horikoshi used advanced aluminum alloys to build an airframe that was both strong and incredibly light. Wing loading was kept extremely low, allowing the aircraft to turn inside almost anything it faced. The Zero was not built to survive damage. It was built to avoid being hit at all, and it was not designed for average pilots. It was designed for samurai. Japanese naval aviation training before the war was among the most demanding in the world. It took years, and many candidates failed. Those who graduated were elite by any standard. These men did not see air combat as a numbers game. They saw it as a duel, the test of spirit, skill, and precision. One Japanese ace wrote that flying the Zero felt like wearing wings, that the aircraft responded to thought itself. To him, American aircraft felt crude by comparison. Heavy, mechanical, soulless. This belief shaped Japanese doctrine. Air combat was an art. Victory came from superior skill. The individual pilot mattered more than the machine. And for the first years of the war, reality seemed to prove them right. In the hands of a master, the Zero was devastating. Against poorly trained Allied pilots, it was nearly unstoppable. WWII 1943. Japanese aviators were no longer just confident. They were convinced of their superiority. That confidence hardened into doctrine. Japanese tactics revolved around the turning fight, the horizontal duel, where agility ruled and pilot skill decided everything. The Zero excelled there. It was built for it. Anything that could not match the Zero in a turn was dismissed as inferior. That assumption would become fatal. Because it blinded Japanese planners to a crucial reality. Air combat itself was changing. While Japan perfected the warrior, another nation was quietly perfecting something else, a system. The Zero was perfect for the war Japan believed it was fighting. A war of duels, skill, and individual mastery. But beyond the horizon, a different kind of war was already taking shape, and the aircraft designed for that war looked nothing like a samurai's blade. If you're enjoying this kind of story, where absolute confidence slowly turns into historical disaster, take a second to support the channel. Leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because from this point forward, everything changes. When Japanese intelligence officers reviewed the specifications of the Grumman F6F Hellcat, the conclusion seemed obvious. The aircraft was heavy. Its loaded weight was more than double that of the Zero. Wing loading was far higher, suggesting sluggish handling. It carried armor, bulletproof glass, and large self-sealing fuel tanks. Features Japanese designers had deliberately rejected. To Japanese eyes, this was not progress, that IT was regression. Senior officers dismissed the Hellcat as proof that Americans were still trying to compensate for inferior pilots with machinery. In the turning fights Japanese pilots mastered, the Hellcat should lose every time. The math seemed undeniable, that certainty would soon collapse. On September 30th, 1943, near Marcus Island, Petty Officer First Class Yoshio Fukui spotted 6 dark shapes climbing toward him. At first, they looked like bombers too large to be fighters. Then the shapes turned. For the first time, Fukui saw the Hellcat clearly. A massive radial engine, a thick fuselage, and short, stubby wings. He was unimpressed, believing the Americans had simply armed a torpedo bomber. Fukui attacked using standard Zero tactics. A diving turn meant to force a horizontal fight. The Hellcat did not turn, that IT went straight up. Fukui watched in disbelief as the American fighter climbed vertically with ferocious power. Its engine delivered nearly 2,000 horsepower, far more than Japanese intelligence had anticipated, but as Fukui tried to follow. His airspeed bled away. The Zero shuddered. Gravity took over. At altitude, the Hellcat executed a maneuver that should not have been possible for an aircraft of its size. Reversing direction cleanly, IT dropped onto Fukui from above .6.50 caliber machine guns opened fire. Heavy rounds tore through the Zero's unarmored frame. Only a desperate spin saved Fukui. His wingman did not survive. The first blood belonged to the Hellcat. Days later, over Wake Island, the pattern repeated .12 Zeros attacked 12 Hellcats with every advantage. Altitude, position, surprise. The Hellcats did not scatter. They accelerated. The heavier aircraft gained speed rapidly. The Zeros struggled to close the distance. Japanese fire sparked harmlessly off armored fuselages. When the Zeros pulled up, they had already lost energy. The Hellcats climbed violently, then dove again, dive, fire. Climb .8 Zeros were destroyed in minutes. Not a single Hellcat was lost. This was no accident. The Hellcat was not trying to outturn the Zero. That IT was making turning irrelevant. American pilots were fighting with physics, not artistry. Speed was energy. Altitude was energy. The Hellcat's weight, once mocked, became its weapon. It was not a sword, that IT was a hammer. But the aircraft alone did not explain the collapse. The real terror was invisible. Radar. American fighters were guided by controllers who could see incoming formations dozens, even hundreds of miles away. Altitude, heading, speed. Everything was known in advance. Japanese pilots described fighting an enemy that could see in the dark. By the time they saw the Hellcats, the attack had already begun. As losses mounted, another imbalance became clear. Japan's elite pilots were irreplaceable. Training took years. By 1944, programs were shortened, fuel was scarce, and new pilots arrived with minimal experience. America's system worked differently. Pilots were trained in large numbers, systematically, safely. Aircraft were standardized. Losses were replaced. Japan had perfected the warrior. America had perfected the system. Still, Japan refused to accept defeat. There was one belief left. That one decisive battle could still change everything. Japan committed all it had left. In one day. In June 1944, Japan made its final gamble. Operation Ego was meant to decide the war. What Japanese pilots did not know was that the battle was already lost. American radar detected the first strike wave more than 150 miles away. Commanders knew exactly where the enemy would be. Hellcats were launched and stacked between 20,000 and 30,000 feet, forming what one pilot later called a steel curtain. When the Japanese arrived, they flew straight into a trap. Hellcats attacked from above, with the sun behind them. The Zeros tried to turn and engage. The Hellcats refused. They made one pass, fired, and climbed away. The Zeros stalled trying to follow, and were destroyed by the next layer waiting above. By the end of the day, 346 Japanese carrier aircraft were gone. American losses were minimal. Pilots joked it felt like a turkey shoot. The name stuck. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot ended Japanese naval aviation as a fighting force. Japan no longer had trained pilots that no longer had aircraft, and no way to challenge the American system. The Zero was not poorly designed. That IT belonged to a different war. Faced with this reality, Japan turned to kamikaze, not out of madness, but calculation. Conventional attack meant certain death. The pilot became the weapon. The Hellcat did not win because it was elegant, and IT won because it represented industry, standardization, and replacement. Japan perfected the warrior. America perfected the system. After the war, Jiro Horikoshi admitted Japan designed for 1941, while America designed for the future. Saburo Sakai later said the Zero made Japan powerful. The Hellcat showed Japan what kind of war it was truly fighting. That'd be why the time the laughter stopped. The sky was already empty. And if you want to see how another great power also laughed, and then understood far too late what America was truly capable of, watch this next. The story continues there.